My name is Jesse Wright, and I am a hobby board game designer. And this is going to be a video blog series where I will occasionally post videos talking about game designs I'm working on and the design process that I go through in bringing a game from concept to creation. I'm also the inspiration for starting up this video blog is that I was accepted as a competitor in the DFW Nerd Nighters game design competition. And so I thought it would be a great opportunity to start the video blog and also have a design competition to follow my progress along with to give the blog some content. So that's what we've got going on here. Unfortunately, I have not yet received my component kit in the mail, and this is partly because I'm one of the competitors from Canada, and it's going to take a little bit longer for the mail delivery to happen. But other competitors in the contest have received their kits and have been excitedly talking amongst each other about their designs. And this got me excited about my design that I haven't started yet. And so I've given myself a mini design contest. I gave myself 24 hours to take a mechanic off of my shelf and get a working game. So I did that, and I've got about 3 hours to go, and so I decided to use the last bit of that time to make this video. So what I'm going to do is first I want to highlight the mechanic, describe the mechanic that I started with, then I'm going to describe a little bit about the game that I ended up with, and then I'm going to debrief and talk about why the mechanic changed, right? Because it changed quite a lot. The original mechanic that I began with is really only a shadow of the mechanic that the game now uses after having gone through several iterations and solo playtests. Right, so this is the mechanic that I took off my shelf and challenged myself to design a game for within 24 hours. You'll immediately notice that the back of the card here looks like a book. In fact, it's labeled Ritual Book. And the mechanic is the very simple observation that if you take a stack of cards and you restrict yourself to flipping it over when you move it to an adjacent pile, it kind of has the character of flipping the pages of a book. If these pages were spells, and the cost to cast a spell was to flip some number of pages forward or backwards, then I thought I would have something interesting. Alright, so this is the game that I have come up with in the last 20 or so hours, starting from that page flipping book mechanic. So the first thing you'll notice, probably, if you're a game designer, is how sharp the prototype looks for something that's less than a day old. So this is a good opportunity for me to highlight an important part of my design process, which is doing graphics design, layout, and card work, and icon design. I find that the procedure of laying out cards, laying out components, designing the look, the functional look. I'm not trying to make things look pretty or gorgeous and spending hours and hours illustrating card frames. I just want to put things in boxes in the places where they, I think, belong, and make icons that are representative of the effect, that are effective icons. Instead of just using stars or circles, I use things like an up arrow to mean pick up a card, or an explosion on a heart to mean deal 1 damage because I put a heart on the life tracks. Things like the procedure of putting this stuff all together, I find, goes a long way to making my designs streamlined from the start. It also helps me discover new mechanics, so some of the mechanics in this game, the ways that the cards interact with each other came about because of the icon design. In the procedure of designing the icons, I made an icon that looked like this, and I realized, oh yeah, I should have a healing effect. Another effect that came about kind of like that was seeing this shield icon gave me the idea for the mechanic in this game for how defensive spells work. Right? It's just the top card of your discard pile is your active defensive spell, and if it's got a shield like this, if it's a card that has the shield like this, then that's what it does. It's a shield spell. And I mean, these things came about because I was looking at icons, basically. So that's a big part of my design process. So I just quickly want to explain the core mechanic of this game that came from the book flipping mechanic, and then I'll spend a couple of minutes talking about why it's different and what changed. So if you want to cast a spell, on your turn you get to discard a card, which I'll do like that. And then you can cast a spell. So when you cast a spell, you choose a card in your hand to play, and first you have to pay its cost, which is this number in the top corner. And every spell has an element. So you'll have to determine its effective cost. So you take its cost and you reduce it by your current power. So you get 1 power for every full wound that you've taken. So you can see here I have no disc on this track. That's because I've been wounded. And so I have 1 power from that track. So the effective cost is 7. Over here you'll see the elemental tracks. It's fire. The fire disc has moved 2 spaces away from the middle. So there's 2 power for all fire spells. So my total power here is 3. So I'll reduce the cost by 3, and so I have to pay 5 cost to cast this spell. And the way that you pay to cast a spell is you take cards in your discard and return them to your hand. So I've got 1, 2, 3 cards in my discard. I return all of those to my hand. There's still 2 cost unpaid. So I have to pay for that in damage. So I'll just take 2 damage on this track here, and then I get to play my fireball spell. I'll put it in my discard and I'll resolve its effect. This one's really straightforward. It's an attack spell that does 3 damage to the opponent. After I do that, I will increase the power of the element of the spell I just cast. So in this case, fire goes up by 1. So now the power for fire is 3. Fire spells are that much cheaper to cast. And because it pulled the fire thing off the board, I actually will put it on my player board to show that I'm presently the master of fire. Now, if another player casts a fire spell, they'll just take that from me. But in the meantime, I am the master of fire. And this is the second way to win the game. One way is to defeat your opponent by damaging them. The other way is to master 2 opposing elements or any 3 elements. So if I were to become master of earth on a later turn, and if I was still master of fire, I would win instantly through elemental mastery. Alright, so that's basically the game. And that doesn't look much like the book flipping mechanic that I started. A lot of the components of the core mechanics of the game I ended up with have been the same since I first sat down and tried to build something with the book. The element track, the life tracks, the little discs, the 2 win conditions, that has been a constant feature of the game. And I think that's actually, the interactions between those things are where the game is most interesting. And the struggle was trying to find a card play mechanic, resource use mechanic, that interacted with it in an interesting way. And the problem with the book flipping mechanic is that it was overly complicated. And it was overly complicated because the most important feature of your deck, when it's treated as a book and you're flipping the cards back and forth, even when the cards are same back and front, is the order of the cards. And when the order of the cards matters, it means that the most important thing you do when you design your deck is choose the order that you put your cards in, and that was taking 15 to 20 minutes to do well. And then the deck basically played itself, which wasn't terribly interesting. It didn't leave a lot of room for players to creatively react to circumstances or do interesting things. So I needed to give players a way to have more choice on their turn besides the 2 cards in front of them, and not to be so constrained by the order that the cards were in. So in between the book and the mechanic I ended up with at the end, I had an interesting solution to the problem that still kind of preserved the book feel, which was basically two hands of cards. And when you you choose a hand to cast a spell from, and you choose a spell. And you pay for that spell by moving cards from the other hand into that hand. Then you take the spell that you played and put it in the other hand, the hand that you paid its cost from. So this creates a flow of cards back and forth between 2 hands. But you can always choose to cast any of your spells. It's just how many life points that you're going to have to spend to cast it is going to depend on the density of cards in the other deck. And so you had this sort of interesting back and forward flow. This is a really interesting mechanic to build a game around. The only problem was I only have 2 hands, and it's very awkward as a single human being to manage 2 hands of cards, especially when you want to move cards back and forth between them and make decisions about which ones to move and which cards to use. So I ended up simplifying that one step further, and that's how I got the discard, which you can't cast spells from, being what pays for the cost of the spells, returning the cards from your discard to your hand. That's how I got there. Although that previous stage, where you had the two hands of cards that fed each other to pay for their spells, I think would make an interesting mechanic for a cooperative game, or maybe a team game of some kind. But that wasn't the game that I was working on here. Also, cooperative games and team games can be really hard to sort of robustly solo playtest, and I was running out of hours, so I didn't really want to start with a new interaction mechanism. I didn't want to design basically a new game from scratch. So now I've got that other mechanic sitting on my shelf, waiting for another 24-hour self-imposed challenge, and I have this game now that I successfully have working that I'm going to bring to the next prototype night that I go to, and I'll see how it holds out when playing with other people. Alright, so that is my first video entry into this series. It's been a lot of fun. I learned a whole bunch of things about shooting videos with your iPad. I apologize for the awkward angles. It's the best tool I've got. And I look forward to creating the first actual entry in this series for the DFW Nerd Nighter competition when my components box arrives. So thanks for tuning in, and I hope you tune in next time.